Everyone had a great day today. We have a very, very special guest with us this evening. I'm going to introduce her in just a moment. But again, I'll just babble here for a couple more moments to let people come in. Once again, everyone, these are live podcasts, and we would always appreciate Q&A. So please throw some questions in for our guest this evening. You're going to enjoy Robyn. She is an amazing lady. She has done a lot of things, and she's still doing a lot of things. So we're going to start this like I always do. Giddy up. Let's go. Robyn O'Brien, how are you this evening?
It's so good to see you, Rick.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you on. We're going to have fun here this evening. So I'm going to ask you the first question I ask everyone. What is on your mind right now, Robyn? What are you thinking about?
So to me, first and foremost, it's always food security. This is what we are working towards. It's what we are working on. Nutritional security is a component of that food security. But, I was raised in a conservative family in Texas, and I see food security as national security. And I really see that our country is in crisis because we are not actually growing the food that Americans want to eat. And that's a problem. And it's a problem not only for our families, but it's a problem for our farmers. And so the economics and the financials and all of that don't work. If our farmers are growing food that American families aren't eating, the math flat out doesn't work. You layer on top of that this war that's happening between Russia and Ukraine and what that is doing to our global food system and the crises that are emerging around food security as it relates to that. So, always first and foremost, it's food security, and it's making sure that it's not just calories in. I mean, we care about these babies. That little grandson of yours that was just running around, you want him to have the highest nutrition he can possibly have.
Yeah.
And so for us, as collaborators in this work, it's really trying to make sure that this nutritional security and this food security is affordable and accessible to absolutely every single American. I mean, I cannot imagine working on anything else, and it feels so incredibly patriotic to me.
Well, that's awesome, and you are definitely a pillar in that foundation. So it's great to have you doing that. But isn't it amazing how fragile our system is when you get a little stress on the system, how it acts like it's gonna crumble.
I know, and I think in a weird way, I mean, COVID and this pandemic, that was one of the silver linings for the food companies themselves. I mean, it would fall on deaf ears. Speaking of farmers, you guys are like, of course it's this fragile. We see it every day. We stand on this soil. We see the impact of these storms.
Yeah.
For the food companies themselves, too many of them didn't know their supply chain. And that became crystal clear during the pandemic when all of a sudden things started to buckle and break. And you would sit down with them and ask them, well, where in your supply chain can you do something? And for most of them, they knew ADM and Cargill. They knew those big middlemen. They didn't know the farmers behind those middlemen.
Yeah.
And so it afforded the companies themselves a huge opportunity to actually get to know their farmers. And I will say it didn't matter if it was a giant processed food company or one of the organic industry companies across the board. They did not know their supply chains as well as they could have. And I think, they've spent the last couple of years recognizing that that was an enormous vulnerability in their business model. And for a lot of them, they've really gone to work at, fixing that.
So I don't want to pick on any particular company, but let's just talk about companies in general. How do they go out and find those farmers? I mean, are they hiring a middle person in between, or are they doing it internally? How are they doing this?
But they actually are going out on farm, and I will not name names, but there is one really big company that I promise everybody on this call would know. And the CEO a couple of years ago had never actually been on farm. And
Wow.
so, the scuttle inside the company was like, is he going to wear jeans? Like what, this is a guy that's a corporate guy. And, when he got on farm, he was wearing his jeans. And I thought, this is crazy. This is one of America's largest food companies.
Yeah.
And the CEO had actually never been on farm, and really you kind of got to say, wow, we've really got that. It's that big of a problem, but it's also that big of an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I think that's the exact way to look at this. It's not, you've got to get past the negativity. Oh my gosh, we can't do this. No, you've got to look at what's the opportunity at hand and how are we going to then take advantage of that. So let's talk about you now. About what? Okay, so where are you in this puzzle? What are you thinking? Um, yeah, just let us know what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I come to it really naturally. I mean, my dad was in the army, and he met my mom, who was a nurse with Save the Children. They met in Vietnam. So this sort of patriotism is in my core. It was how I was
Mhm.
raised. So when I say food security is national security, I mean, I believe that to my toes. It is one of the most important things we could be addressing as a country. I wish we could take something like the Farm Bill and help every single American understand how critically important that piece of legislation is.
Yeah.
But for me, my work, I came out of Houston, Texas. I went to business school. But it was really when I had my four kids, and I packed them in pretty close together. I had four kids in 5 years, and my youngest child
Wow.
had an allergic reaction. And all of a sudden, everything that I had learned academically and in my career was totally useless.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting there thinking, like, how do I protect this child from these food allergies? And where did this sort of onslaught of kids with food allergies come from? And so I started doing a lot of digging. I pulled on that skill set that I had developed in business school. I'd been on the investment side and the research side, and I really leaned into it to really try to understand what was happening to the health of the American children. So as I was digging into data on that, unfortunately, it doesn't just pull out in a nice, neat little folder. You can't just go to the FDA
Yeah.
or go to the CDC and pull your children's stats. You're kind of pulling them from all these different places. And so as I was learning about, not only the escalating rates of food allergies and how there had been a 265% increase in the rate of hospitalizations related to food allergic reactions. So that's
Wow.
people checked into the ER, not somebody just saying they have a food allergy. There was that. There was, 1 in 3 Caucasians and 1 in 2 minority kids born in the year 2000, which is my oldest child's class, were expected to be insulin dependent. And then the one that just stopped me in my tracks was the president's cancer panel issued a report, and the panel had been formed during the Bush administration, but the report had been released during the Obama administration, which I really appreciated, that it was bipartisan, that it had been
Hmm.
shared by both parties.
Sure.
And in that report, it said that cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in American children under the age of 15. And when I learned that, Rick, as a mother of four, I just thought, like, it put me in a dark place. And I thought, why isn't this the front page of the Wall
Well,
Street
yeah.
Journal? Why isn't this everything that we are talking about? I was also learning that 1 in 2 men are expected to get cancer and 1 in 3 women. I mean, those are just jaw-dropping statistics. And, when I
Why? I
saw
got.
one in 2 men, I thought, like, what are we waiting for? 1 in 1? Like, why are we not
Yeah.
talking about this?
So what do you think? I'm going to stop you there for a minute. Let's back up now. So is there something that happened 20 years ago, 30 years? I mean, what do you think's the happening here?
I think there are a lot of different theories and there are a lot of different factors. And so what I did is I had to step back and say, correlation is not causation. Just because Dr. Oz had a TV show, that's not the reason. You know what I mean? It could be
Right.
anything. So you can't
Right.
just attribute it because of this correlation. So, I stepped back, and my mother is actually from New Zealand, and I'm actually named after a farmer in New Zealand. And something she taught us as kids was always to step back and say, well, how's the rest of the world doing something? And that's when I really began to understand that we had made this fundamental shift in agriculture in the US, and a lot of our trading partners hadn't adopted it. Or if they had adopted that shift in agriculture, they had labeled these new ingredients so that consumers had full visibility and transparency into what they were eating. In
Yeah.
the US, we chose not to label the ingredients. And so,
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of back and forth. He said, she said on science of genetically engineered crops. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the right to know as an American what you are feeding your family and what you are putting into your own body.
Yeah.
We were not given that right to know. And, as the science has continued to emerge, there were questions around different toxicity components of these things. So I had to sit with that for a while, because I'm named after a farmer, and she was using a lot of these chemicals on her farm in New Zealand. So I understood the sensitivity. I understood the pressure of a farmer to support his family and the economics that were involved there. And I thought, why have we strapped this economic model onto our farmers? Because what was happening is, up until that point, you and every other farmer had been able to save their seeds. And so that actually saves you money, because you're
Right.
saving your seeds season to season to season.
Right.
When these new genetically engineered crops were introduced, they were patented. And so a farmer had to license the use of those seeds, and they were charged royalty fees and licensing fees and trait
Right.
fees. So like if I'm the company selling those seeds, that's a brilliant business model because I've got licensing fee revenue, trait fee revenue, royalty revenue.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
great if you're the chemical company. If you're the farmer, you're suddenly paying all these things out that you have never had to pay before. And what you want to look at is as we increase the application of genetically engineered crops and then the portfolio of chemicals you also have to buy to grow them, farmer debt level just started to skyrocket.
Yeah.
And that to me felt like an intolerable cruelty because I thought, what we have actually done is this agrochemical company has built its model on the backs and on the debt levels of the US farmer. And with that, I really had to step back and say like it felt so morally complicated is probably the polite way to say it. I had a stronger reaction at the time. And I thought, we can't get our farmers out of this until we can figure out the economic construction that allows them to unwind out of that debt and to unwind out of that agrochemical model into an economic solution that actually is financially viable for them. So, it was so multifaceted. It was just this very, very deep concern around what was happening to the health of American families. And then recognizing that if we literally bankrupt the American farmer, we really are in a food security crisis.
Yeah, your dog's got a hold of something out there. That's okay. That's life. We love that. That's why this is live and spontaneous. Don't worry about that, Robyn. But Robyn, this is you're describing something that's very dangerous here. I mean, we are just days or maybe weeks away from meltdown here.
Yeah, I mean, I think people need to understand that we really are in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah.
And you can speak to it. Other farmers that I've met with over the last 15 years can speak to it. The other piece of this is that if you're a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old and you've watched your dad get into this agrochemical model and the debt levels associated with it, where that ends. And so what was happening, what we're seeing happen is these younger generations are like, I don't necessarily want to step into farming. I don't want to take over that model because it's not financially viable. It's not financially viable.
And the risk level's too high. The risk is too high. Yeah. So that's where, that's where we have to, as a collective here, we have to come up with a way that we don't offend the farmer, but yet somehow educate them to the point where they need to understand it's time to step out of that world and try something different.
Yeah, so, I think it's partly education, and I spent a lot of time, speaking to this and meeting with amazing farm organizations, and I'm so grateful for that. And I've spent a lot of time with farmers who pushed back in a really aggressive way, which I'm also grateful for because it helped me learn more and understand more of where their pain points are. And what became really clear was you can educate and educate and educate, but if it's not a financial solution, if you can't change that financial situation for the grower, all you are doing is inflicting pain because you were telling him or her something, that is causing so much pain, and yet you're not coming with a solution. And so that's why I'm so proud of what we have created at Replant, because what we landed on was we need that financial solution. We need that financial opportunity to open up for the growers so that they can take that 3 to 5 years, or you've said it took by year 7, you felt you could breathe. We need to give them that timeline so that they can make this transition and also support their family. You wouldn't ask any other industry to strap on the debt levels and put themselves in those kinds of conditions that we have asked American farmers to live in. And so, again, it may be because I'm named after one and she had cancer and her daughter had cancer, it may be the patriotism piece of this, but I know we can do better. And so you've got to look, unfortunately, or, fortunately, you've got to look at all these different levers in front of us. So education is one piece, access to capital is another piece, technical assistance is another piece, teaching the farmers how to break that addiction with the chemical inputs and transition towards soil stewardship. And then, another key piece is policy. And what we're seeing is at the state level, policymakers are starting to sort of wake up to this because one of the key problems is that in this agrochemical model, the damage done to the soil has really hindered the soil's ability to hold water, carbon, nutrients, and all these other things. But if water's a North Star for absolutely every single person on the planet, then we really need to enhance the soil's ability to hold water.
Right.
And unfortunately, with how we've treated the soil, it's lost that carrying capacity. And so what we're seeing is as you transition towards soil stewardship, you increase that carrying capacity for water of soil. That's a policy play, because then all of a sudden you got a governor out in California or a governor in Ohio, or, yesterday's conversation was about the governor in Alaska. These governors are realizing like water is one of the most valuable assets they've got. And if we can actually farm in a way that is stewarding water in a responsible way, there's really a policy obligation there.
Well, sure. I mean, all these states that rely on pivots to maintain growth of their crops, if they could reduce that by 50%.
Oh my gosh, I know. And I think, I had a call last week with a corporate ranching entity, and the farmers there had taken land, and the picture was from 2016 to 2020. And I just thought, like, put that in front of Congress. This picture alone in front of Congress explains everything that you and I are doing. Yeah. And it was a barren piece of land that had been used to grow potatoes that was just desolate looking. And within that 4-year period, it had been transitioned using chickens and basically chicken poop to fertilize this just gorgeous acreage into this just lush green, gorgeous field. And I thought, like, that is within 4 years. And I think that's why I'm so, such a pathological optimist on this, is because, and you are too, it's because you can see what's possible. What's doable.
Well, let's go back to replant. Okay, how can folks, first of all, how can folks get to your website? Give us the web address, please.
Yes, please do. replantcapital.com. And then, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on social media anywhere, but replantcapital.com. Send us a note. Let us know that you're coming in through Rick's podcast, so that we know you're a friend of Rick's. And we would love to connect with you. There is, as a team, there are 3 co-founders. The partnerships that I bring from my work over the last 15, 20 years with these food companies. And that came from a really personal place. They started to reach out because they were like, hey, I have a child with autism, or I have a child with cancer, or I have a mother, that's got breast cancer. The personal became, professional, which has been amazing to witness over the last decade. But in those partnerships, we were able to sit down and say, who are your most forward-thinking farmers? That's when we learned which companies actually knew their farmers. Yeah. And then, we could sit down with those farmers and say, what do you need? And instead of coming from this arrogant place of one size fits all, and we're the banking institution, right, we're going to tell you what you need as a right farmer, which is so arrogant. Mm-hmm. Instead we're going to sit down with you, and our head of lending comes from the farm credit system, and he's out on farm, and he's like, what do you need? What do you need to make this transition? Is it cover crop seeds? Is it equipment? Do you need capital for, expansion of your acreage? What do you need? And then we craft a term sheet based on that farmer's needs. What's unique about us is the only thing we ask, and the cost of capital is extraordinarily low, because we are tapping these philanthropic sources that are understanding that it's going to take 3 to 5 years. Most conventional lenders are not going to give you 3 to 5 years. And so we can tap lending partners that allow us to give the farmers 3 to 5 years. And what we ask in return is that we can capture these metrics around water conservation, water infiltration, soil organic matter. So that's actually part of our term sheet. And then we bring in that guaranteed buyer. So, after working with some of these companies for 15 years, to be able to have them, guaranteeing the offtake. And it's so that, for any farmer that says, I'm ready to step into this, we can mitigate the risk by offering the low cost of capital, by offering the technical assistance, and by bringing in that guaranteed buyer for the offtake. Because again, like financially, it has to work for the farmer. If it does not work financially for the farmer, it's not going to stick.
Yeah. Folks, this is huge what Robyn's talking about. This is big. We did not do this. We carried our own load, and I'm telling you, it's a big load to carry. When you are trying to step out of this, I call it the easy button, chemical world, and move into a world that is building soil health and building human health, it's not easy mentally or financially. So let's go through the playbook now, Robyn. So a farmer contacts you, I mean, how much, obviously you just talked about the financial part, but we also talked about teaching. Are you folks doing the teaching, or are you teamed up with some other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I am constantly saying to my team, we are teachers also.
Yep.
We are teaching, and we are teaching inside the companies themselves. I would not assume to be able to teach a farmer anything. I would say we would collaborate with the farmers.
Yeah.
We are teaching investors. We're teaching a lot of investors. We host a lot of webinars. There's a lot of interest in supporting transition agriculture, whatever you want to call it, soil health, regenerative. I mean, it gets a lot of different labels, but there's a lot of interest in supporting transition agriculture because we know as we build soil health, the products coming off that land have a higher nutrient component. And then you've also got this, ability to store carbon and store water. And so for an investor, they would get just the return that we would offer through the fund, and also these talking points about these metrics and the impact on water and the impact on soil health and the impact with carbon. But I think the education piece is critical. And, you touched on the mental health component. Pioneering stuff is an incredibly lonely job. And it's something I had to do for a very long time. You had to do for a very long time. You tap into, your family, you tap into your faith. There's a lot of resiliency and tenacity that's required. And some people aren't wired for that. Some people are. And so something that I've learned is, anytime we're building anything, I mean, if you were building your farmhouse, you would have supportive scaffolding going around it as you construct this beautiful farmhouse. And something I've learned is that as people, we're really not any different. And we need that supportive scaffolding around us. And so that's a role that I really try to play is, how can I support you as you grow into this leadership role inside the company, inside a farm organization, to provide that sort of supportive scaffolding, kind of almost in a spiritual way, to help people understand they don't have to go through this by themselves. And that's born out of me having to go through it by myself. I just know that was enormous, and it's asking a lot to ask someone to go through it by themselves. And I think you've talked about it. I've heard other farmers talk about it, where you get together in these coffee shops, and a couple of years ago there'd maybe be like 3 or 4 or 5 people, and now it's standing room only. That's that supportive scaffolding. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's that community. And see, that's what I love so much about I don't know, call it a movement, I don't know, whatever you want to call this, but when you get the folks in the room, everyone is willing to lay it all out on the line and be total transparent, and not scared to pick up the phone and call Lauren Steinlage or Mitchell Hora or somebody and ask, hey guys, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? That's what I love about this. And let's talk a little bit about that. What are you seeing on people that are really pushing in this, that are trying to figure out how to vertically stack all this together? What are you seeing?
So, I think there's a lot of sort of hard skills that people tend to focus on, and you miss some of the most important skills. I think the ability to collaborate is an enormously important skill. Not everybody can do it. There's a lot of ego, and ego tends to be the absolute death of collaboration. Collaboration is a key piece. Creativity is a key piece. I look at you guys out in the field, and to me, you are just like God's artist. You are out there designing this stuff, and it's like, there's incredible creativity that's required there. And, that's another skill set that I think tends to not be spoken to enough. So, I'd say collaboration, creativity, and then my third C is courage. And it's easy to get locked into a comfort zone. It is so easy to let fear take over your head and start to spin out these terrible, catastrophic stories. Right. And so, that's where I think leaning on others, like where you're having a moment, you're like, whew, just went into this total spiral of panic. Something I've learned in my career is that fear really, to me, feels like a seatbelt that's trying to lock you in your comfort zone. It just kind of tries to keep you in your status quo. Yeah. And I've learned to really identify it and be like, I know when I'm pushing through into something new, when I can feel that seatbelt trying to lock me in. Mm-hmm. And I've learned to sort of identify it and name it. But I think, touching on the community piece, you really do. You need to be able to pick up a phone and call somebody and be like, I'm kind of freaking out today. This is where my head is. Talk me back from the edge. And that's this community piece that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think this has got to stay, it's got to stay woven in here with this fabric that's, it's almost like we're building the bridge as we're walking across the river, it's all happening at the same time here.
Yeah, we're not, I used to say movement. We're building an industry, Rick, and we are actually building a resiliency into the US farm economy. It's that big. It is really that big. And as you build any industry, you have all of these different components. You have consultants, of course, you need consultants, you have financial, and you have capital, you're gonna have educators, there are all these different pieces. And I think, again, like, that's why it's so exciting to me, because like the door is wide open, and it's like, there's so much opportunity for anyone to come in. If somebody's brilliant at marketing, if somebody's brilliant at developing podcasts, whatever it is, find your thing and bring it.
Yeah. Well, we've got a question from Deanna Lazinski. Deanna, how you doing? I hope you're having a good evening this evening. Robyn, basically what she wants to know is if we wean ourselves from big chemistry, big whatever, big fertilizer, whatever you want to call it, how much pushback are they going to have? Are they going to allow this to happen? I can imagine your feet have been on the fire before on this one. So tell us what you think about that.
Yes, there will be pushback. Yeah. Any change and any growth, think of that little seed that you guys plow underneath the earth, and think of how much pushback is on that little seed to grow into the thing that we know it needs to become. We're the seed. Yeah. And so, there is going to be pushback. There is always disruption. There are always going to be the naysayers. There are always going to be the status quo protectors. And, one of the companies that I saw when I was in investments was Blockbuster. Blockbuster had 100% market share back in the day. There may be people on this call that don't even know what a Blockbuster is, but it had 100% market share back in the day. There was a tiny little startup called Netflix that came to Blockbuster and said, hey, we want to stream videos over the internet. Would you want to collaborate with us? And the CEO of Blockbuster said, who's going to want to watch videos over the internet? Totally walked away from the deal a couple of times. Now Blockbuster has totally, gone bankrupt. And I promise every person on this podcast probably has been watching Netflix over the last couple of years in the pandemic. So don't underestimate disruption, creativity, again, collaboration. The CEO of Netflix was trying to collaborate, with the old school guys. The old school didn't see it. They couldn't see the vision. They didn't want to let go of the 100% market share. Right. What I think is super interesting right now is that you have companies that when I came out, 10 years ago talking about this stuff, they were doing everything they could to get me not to talk about it. Those same companies now are saying, we're listening to our farmers, and we know that the farmers are asking for organic product. So, it's not going to be this beautiful straight line. It's not going to be this perfect disintegration disruption into something new. It is going to be both and for a while. And so, again, it makes economic sense for our farmers not to be strapped into $426 billion of debt to finance the agrochemical model. That is not a sustainable farming model. End of story. So, it's going to take a while. And yes, there's going to be a lot of pushback. What I think is interesting is that the food industry itself is now, joining in this campaign, because what has happened is 80% of consumers now are trying something organic. It's not everything. I mean, not everybody, you can't afford it all anyway. It's the math doesn't work. The economics aren't there yet. But 80% of consumers are trying something organic, and 75% of all grocery store categories now carry something organic, including things like pet food. The problem is only 1% of US farmland is organic. So if I'm the CEO of General Mills and 80% of my consumers are buying organic, 75% of grocery store categories carry organic, but only 1% of farmland is organic, my math doesn't work. That's not good. What's happening is we're importing organic, from these other countries with these third-party verifiers, and it's like, what actually is going on there? You'll see a big headline every once in a while, like some boat coming over, and it's bogus organic. Again, to me, it's like, let's grow what Americans want to eat. And if there is a premium for organic, then absolutely the American farmer should benefit from that, which then brings you to the next part of the math, which is the subsidies in the farm
Right.
bill. So as taxpayers, my tax dollars are going into that, and they're supporting this agrochemical model. That's how my tax dollars are being used. If I, when I was mailing in those checks, got to check a box and say, hey, I want to support farm green and guys like Rick, you know, instead of the agrochemical guys, but we don't have that choice. And so it's not an even playing field. So you've got to level that playing field financially, which is why, you know, these policy conversations are so important. And so how can we level that playing field financially? That's going to take a big choir of us making some noise, and absolutely the chemical companies. I mean, that is a handout that they get. That is a handout that they get. And, you know, it's not, people sort of spin it like it's a handout to farmers. It's really, you're financing the growth of that agrochemical company. So that handout is actually benefiting those agrochemical companies.
But I don't think it's viewed as that in the mainstream. I don't think it's viewed that way.
I don't think, you know, I really was so fortunate to have some amazing economic professors when I was in grad school. And that's really what we're talking about, is basic economics. And you're right. I don't think it is clear enough to enough people, because people complain about the higher price point, but they don't realize that their own tax dollars are creating that inequality.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's sort of like, there's going to be a moment where there is that, you know, like, I can't believe our tax dollars are actually subsidizing this food system that I don't actually want to choose. And that's the bigger conversation. So, you know, I talk a lot about governance and how important it is. The profile of the financial institutions and the profile of our government institutions really are pretty similar. And so to have more representation at these higher levels, I mean, I would love to pack every member of Congress on a bus and bring them out to your farm and say, this is actually what it looks like, because they don't know. And so they're voting on legislation that they just don't know enough about. And they get these talking points from the lobbyists, but it's like, I think one of the most valuable things we could do would be to pack up every member of Congress and get them out on a farm.
Yeah. And I think also, you know, the CEOs and the executive level of all these companies, every time, you know, if I am fortunate enough to meet these folks, I tell them, you've got to get on your work boots and drive out to the farm.
Totally.
You have to do this.
Totally.
And they all are like, well, why, you know, and then once you talk through it, it's like, oh, well, I never thought about that.
Oh,
well,
I mean, yeah. I mean, I wish on the education piece, you know, my 4 kids have heard a lot over the years, you know, but I wish it was taught in school. You know, it's like, this is food economics. Like, what we're talking about is food economics, and this should be taught in school. And instead we're in this, like, you know, debate over the cost of organic. Well, you know, it has been intentionally structured that way using our tax dollars, you know. So let's start to understand taxation in the US. Let's understand policy. It's so teachable. It's not as intimidating. I think some people maybe think it's really intimidating. It's really not. It's really just some really simple math.
Right. Got a question here from Lauren. What crops or products are you looking for? Is there anything you're looking for in specific with replant?
That's a great question. So we really are focused on diversifying. You know, we recognize that there are some commodity crops that, you know, we have farmers who have been growing genetically engineered corn and soy that are really trying to break from that model. We've got ranchers, we've got chicken farmers, we've got almond orchards, you know, that we're working with, berry growers. You know, we've got some of the big beverage companies that make some of our country's beer. And, you know, it's really, I'm really proud of how diversified the portfolio is. One of the farmers that we're working with is bringing the very first regenerative organic certified product to one of these multinational food companies, the very first one. And I'm so proud that we're at that point. And so, you know, for us, it's just, how do we expedite this? How can we facilitate it? How can we get capital into the hands of farmers? Right. How can we help these food companies offer the products that American families want in the 21st century? Because it has changed, and it's changed because the health of our families have changed. And nobody wants to be reading labels in the grocery store. I mean, I didn't. I wasn't one of those moms. I mean, I really, that was the last thing I wanted to spend time on. And yet, because of the rates of diabetes and cancer and food allergies and all these things, we all find ourselves like screening and reading these labels. And so to me, it's, one of the greatest services is how can we make this easier and more affordable and more accessible? And
Right.
to me, like, the solution has to start with the farmer. And if that farmer is financially successful, that's the beginning of scaling this.
Right. Well, let's go to organic for a moment. I got a question from Michael here. Robyn, with organic food market share growing at the rate that it's growing, are we at the tipping point with organic going mainstream? So then I assume what he wants to add also is it going to dilute it to the point to where those prices are going to come down?
Yeah, I think that to me is really kind of right where we are, this nexus, of how it's clear the consumer is asking for it.
Yeah.
It's clear when companies like Walmart, 7-Eleven, Costco, this isn't some fringy West Coast, New York thing anymore. This isn't just Whole Foods, Whole Paycheck anymore. You walk into any King Soopers, any Safeway, it's there. Any Kroger, it's there. And I think what was super interesting to me was early on in my work in trying to get the big multinationals to begin to adjust their portfolio, they were slow to adopt. And the actual retailers themselves, the grocery stores themselves, adopted much faster because they saw the consumer coming through. And think about it, every time we go through that checkout line, you're scanning something.
Yeah.
And Safeway is capturing that data. So Safeway is like, well, hey, we see a bunch of families coming through buying organic carrots. And the next thing you know, Safeway's got their own organic carrots. And so, the retailers themselves were the early adopters. And a company like Kroger went from 0 to $1 billion in revenue in their organic product offering, that private label, in the first couple of years. And it's just been their moneymaker year after year after year.
Wow.
So, again, I can't preach it as this solution because unfortunately it's not affordable and accessible to everyone right now because we don't have it structured in a way that makes sense mathematically with the money coming to the farmer. And then on top of that, if a farmer's growing things organic, he has to, pay all these fees to prove it's safe and then pay fees to label it organic.
Right.
That's upside down in my opinion. I think the genetically engineered crops that have been introduced in the last 20 and 30 years, those are actually the things that should be labeled because those are the things that are new. That's a bigger conversation. I may still be talking about that when I'm 90, but
yeah. I mean, if you think back about that, Robyn, the first genetic soybean, I believe, was 1997. So what is that, 25 years ago? Mm-hmm. That's it. Mm-hmm. And look at what, not only, looking at what could be issues with the food, but look at now, we've got weeds that are resistant to certain chemistries that the farmers can no longer combat. So this is almost the definition of a conundrum, I mean, and the folks don't know how to get off the merry-go-round.
Well, and then they just get promised the next chemical and then promised the next chemical. And, unfortunately it becomes the addiction has been created. And then that addiction is being strapped on the back of the farmer with these increased debt levels. And that was the part to me that just was so intolerable. And so, and when I learned, because I didn't know the soil science. And as I began to understand that you could actually break that addiction to the chemicals and begin to steward the soil and heal the soil, it just became, I was so grateful for that as a solution and thought, how can we scale this? How can you scale the education piece, which you do so much of, Rick? And then how do you scale the technical assistance piece? Because it's hard for any of us to admit what we don't know. And, if a farmer has only been farming using that model for 20 or 30 years, you're in a hard place sort of psychologically to be like, you don't know what to do. So to be able to offer these technical assistance partners, that space is growing like crazy and it's attracting a lot of young people. And what I love about that is it takes 5th, 6th generation, farm families, somebody who's probably in their 30s, who understands soil stewardship and also then can take the amazing technology we do have today for 21st century technology and the the on-farm technology, again, is just remarkable what we have today. And you can marry that soil stewardship with 21st century technology to really accelerate some of these solutions.
Yeah. I love that you just make this sound so simple. I just you explain this very well. So I appreciate that. And I'm sure our audience does also. So let's go a little deeper, which this is where I'm at in my journey. I am, if you don't have soil health, you're never going to have human health. And I just, you know, do we have less yields than we used to have? Yes, we do. Do we have some fields that maybe be a little weedy than they used to be? Yes, we do. But we've eliminated all synthetic everything. It's
But
all
listen to what you
gone.
just said, the bit before though, Rick. I mean, the guy using the chemicals has also got all the weeds,
That's right.
and his yields have also been compromised because
But
the soil health has deteriorated so much. So, it's not as black and white as campaigns want it to be.
that's that's
This is
exactly
truly in
right.
transition. We've got weeds now on both sides. And so thankfully there's 21st century technology emerging. I mean, there's all kinds of, companies that are really trying to address soil science, and there are companies that are coming out with robotics for the weeds. And it's like, we really are standing at the front of I think, a very exciting time for agriculture, where we can
Yeah.
say, okay, this is what we learned over the last 30 or 40 years. And now we can take this, we can use these soil diagnostics, we can use the data, we can use the technology to inform us, and get to these solutions faster.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a question here in just a moment. I want to make a statement here first. You know, you made a very good point there just a minute ago. I was saying, how do we have weed problems? Yeah, we do sometimes. But you also said, but you see, those folks are never talked about. It's always looking at, well, look what Rick's doing. Look at
Mm-hmm.
that mess Rick's got over here.
Mm-hmm.
It's never talked about the other way around. So you've got to be able to overcome that, which that's difficult, but that's okay. That's just part of life. But what I want to ask you is, what what do you think needs to happen? I mean, who needs to come together? Who needs to be aligned, or what needs to happen to keep the push going, I guess, to go to that next level? What do you see?
I think we need to have a very serious meeting of the minds in DC.
Yeah.
That budget, that those levers at the federal level influence so much. And something that I often say is, you cannot fix a broken food system with a broken financial system.
Yeah.
And the reason we have such extractive agricultural systems on the farm is because the financial systems that are governing that are also highly extractive. And so the thing that has not been talked about enough is that capital is actually the first ingredient in any food system. And the terms of that capital are going to dictate the terms of that farm. And so unfortunately, we've had enormously extractive terms dictated, by, some of the federal spending bills, by some of the conventional lending institutions. And our proposition at Replant is, why in the world have we accepted that as status quo?
Yeah.
Let's look at capital as a regenerative force for good. So, you hear about regenerative agriculture, soil health, like, we should actually be thinking about capital that way too. And so if we are going to be allocating the jaw-dropping number of tax dollars that we are allocating, why are we not allocating those dollars in a regenerative way? So that's the bigger conversation. And so unfortunately, I think it gets siloed. And the conversations are, here are the farmers over here, and here are the lobbyists over here, and here are the policymakers over here. And really, it is way past time for everybody to come around the table and have this conversation. And we're seeing it at the state level. Here in Colorado, I'm really proud of what we're doing. Governor Polis is a friend, and Kay Greenberg, our ag secretary, she's a friend. And she really is recognizing this public-private partnership. And that's what we're talking about. You can't solve it by yourself. I can't solve it by myself. Bill Sack can't solve it by himself. So it's going to take all of us coming around the table to say, how do we collaborate and solve this together?
Right. Yeah, I just, and I think this can happen. I think there's the right, there's the right mindset. I think the urgency is becoming, it's real. It's not just hearsay anymore. And maybe it took COVID to be the catalyst for this, but then obviously with Putin invading Ukraine, it just has amplified this problem.
Well, and I also think, you're right. It's like that projection of, oh, look over there at the organic guys. Oh, look at the weeds over there. Because, hey, guess what? I don't want you looking in my field,
Yeah.
And what we know is, are these super weeds? I mean, the stories around those super weeds are some pretty horrific stories. So we've got a weed problem, and the promises of the last 30 years help create the
Yeah.
super weed problem that we now have.
Right.
Do I want to spend any more time wagging a finger and pointing back? No, I did that, and I don't want to do it anymore. It's, we know we have a problem. We're big kids here. There's a problem. And, how do we create a solution that is economically viable for our farmers? And I think, something that we forget, and you know it better than anyone, is what we do to the soil, we also do to our children. And so the more responsible we can be about soil stewardship, the more responsible we are being for our children.
Right.
And I think where it's so exciting in this transition agriculture right now is it is such a win, 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 win. It's a win for the farmer. It's a win for soil. It's a win for climate. It's a win
Yep.
for our kids, win for the food companies, so it's like everybody wins except the agrochemical company. So that's the one, that's the Lone Ranger on the other side. But I think, what we need to realize is, like, we've got this win-win. So, let them alchemize themselves into some kind of ag tech company, whatever they want to do next, but it's become really clear, that the model that they promised, as you said, in the early 1990s, that's when those first patents, were first released. It hasn't materialized like they promised. And it's time for us to do something different.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of people on the opposite side of this space that have a big loud voice, that they're saying things too, that we can't feed the world unless we have genetically modified traits in this food,
Well, so that was something that got slammed at me for a long time. And so when Bayer came out and said, we're actually going to be rolling out an organic line, I thought, that sort of makes that talking point null and void.
Right.
And the reason they said they want to roll out that organic line is because they were listening to the farmers. So again, if I could do anything, if I could elevate any voice, it would be a voice like yours. It's the voice of the farmer. I don't think farmers have the respect that they deserve for the role that they play. It is not just for the food that you're putting on our family's dinner table. It is this soil stewardship, and is the work that you're doing around climate and the environment. And you're not compensated for that. I feel so strongly that farmers and teachers both are not compensated for the service that they provide. And so, again, it gets back to the math. So how can we make sure, that farmers are actually compensated for this greater good that they're providing?
Well, teachers especially, there's no teachers paid enough money because they're the beginning foundation of how that young person's being, their structure and their future is all about it.
Well, and if you look at our country's military budget for national security, and it's like, food security is national security, and it's time to think about these things in a much bigger way. And again, like, none of us, I wouldn't be able to feed my family for very long without, the support of all of the farmers around us. And we're really vulnerable, and we're vulnerable with the legacy crisis that we now have in the U.S. farm economy, with young people not wanting to step into it. So how do we make this economically and financially viable and appealing, to the next generation?
Right. Now, we're running short on time here this evening. Let's go back to replant a little bit here. Let's go a little deeper. So someone walks in, obviously you've got to get as much history as you can from that person, but lay out what it would look like, how much money could they possibly get to, and what are some more of the terms of the contract?
Well, again, it's going to be farmer by farmer, but we really are trying to address sort of this bridge capital, this space that people can't touch. when I sat down with my friends at the Farm Service Agency at the USDA, and they shared that the largest loan they can make is $600,000, I thought, how in the world do we transition at scale if that's the
Yeah.
largest loan that one of our government institutions can make? So, for us, we've had loans as small as 250,000, but we really are looking at a bigger number than that. We've got loans right now that are at like 7 million, and it's going to depend. If we're talking to a guy that's, running chickens in California, it's going to look totally different to somebody that's got a ranch in Georgia or rice down in Arkansas.
Sure.
So it's really, what happens from our side of things is Don, who is the head of Soil Fund, and Tim, who is the head of lending, will come out and meet with you. And, they'll be on your farm and sit down with you and say, what are the needs? Is it acquisition of acreage? Is it equipment? What are your needs? And then they'll structure those terms specific, to your specific project. As we continue to scale, I am certain we're going to start to see, projects start to repeat themselves.
Yeah.
But right now, Tim, he comes from this farm credit system. And so that's his background. And then they sit down and they craft those terms. We make sure that we have a guaranteed buyer for the offtake. I think that is a really, really critical piece for mitigating the risk. And that's something I'm so proud to bring to the team, because I had heard from so many farmers how they wanted to make the transition, but they couldn't stare down that 3-year transition period without not knowing if somebody's going to be there on the end to buy it. So again, for us, it was how do we mitigate the risk across that transition?
So does the farmer and the individual or 501c3 or wherever the money's coming from, do they get to meet each other, and do they get to
Well,
build
that's a great question.
relationship?
So, we've had, as in the world we're in right now, there's animal ag and there's plant-based, and there are
Oh
people
yeah.
that are really opinionated on both sides of those things,
Oh yeah.
So we try to sort of say, like, I have a dad that loves to eat meat, and I want him to eat the highest quality meat he's going to eat. I also have a sister-in-law that's plant-based, and I want her to eat the highest quality plant-based stuff.
Right.
So I'm not going to tell them what to eat, but I want them to eat the best of the category that they're in.
Right.
And that's sort of our approach. And so we do have investors that are very plant-based and very plant-forward, So if we're talking about transitioning an almond orchard in the Central Valley in California and transitioning that orchard, we see a 500% increase in water infiltration. Which that's an amazing amount,
Oh yeah.
of an increase. We can say, here's an opportunity in California for those plant-based people. We don't, I think, what we are really trying to do is educate. So instead of having investor conferences, which look like investor conferences, we host our investors on farm.
That's awesome.
And we take them, we've had them on dairy farms that are, in transition. And there's a lot of opportunity for a dairy farm that's in transition. It's not all pretty and it's not all perfect. And that's actually the point, is to be able to come in and say, we're going to take you in underneath here. We're going to pull the lid back, and you're going to be able to see what's actually happening here. And you can see where you can put a biodigester on this farm to capture the methane. And then all of a sudden it powers that farm and that community. And that's the education piece that I love doing. And so, we've got farmers, around the country who've offered to host more of these investor events. That's one of the absolute things I'm the most excited about coming out of COVID.
Well, and see, I can't imagine that, first of all, if these folks were going to take their money somewhere else, they'd want to know exactly what was going to happen with their money all the way to the end. So what's different in this situation? It's exactly the same.
Right.
And maybe that's where, Lauren asked another question, and he said, any events or programs that you would recommend we need to get involved in? Well, maybe we need to be talking with Replan about possibly, even though we're not borrowing money from you, maybe we need to have these events.
Yeah, Colleen on our team is the one that puts together these webinars, and she's like Rachel for you, and she's absolutely great at it. And her touch is just amazing. And I think, what I will suggest to her coming out of this is we should be doing one for the farm community. It's just Q&A, like who's Replant? Who is Replant? Get to know our team, and we can answer the questions. And Don and Tim, who are overseeing all the lending, could be on that call to answer these questions. And I would love to do something like that with you.
And we can do this. We can do another episode in the future, Robyn, and get the whole gang on and just walk through a scenario. We can do that.
Well, and I think, we're not going to assume to know, I think that's where we got into trouble It was sort of this top-down approach from the agrochemical companies. It was top-down. From the financial industry, it was top-down. And it's like, it's the farmer who has the knowledge and the wisdom and the expertise. And why in the world did we silence that voice? And so, for us, it's how do we elevate it?
Yeah, and now I think what's the word I want? The creative thing now to think about is how are we going to get this shift to happen without insulting them, making them upset, telling them that what they've been doing is hasn't been correct. So we got to figure out how to massage that and get as many to shift as we can. I don't think you need to get everyone, because see, once you get a nucleus of 3 or 4 or 5 folks in an area, then it just feeds on itself, and then it just grows.
Right. I mean, we've talked about this, Rick. Our initiative is to make a farmer in his particular community as successful as possible and let that story tell itself. Like we're just behind the scenes providing the support, because then it's farmer to farmer, and we're getting that. We're starting to hear from farmers being referred from other farmers. To me, that is just where the magic starts to happen. I do think like we are starting to hit a level of conversation, and I do understand the sensitivity. When I was first speaking about the food industry, people don't want to hear what they've been doing is bad. They don't want to feel like they've been labeled as wrong, and we're not saying that. It's just, as we continue to learn more, we learn that there is more that we can do. And I think by having this economic conversation and making it a financial conversation, there is not a farmer I know that is comfortable with the debt levels that they are in. Some of these farmers will say, I've been in debt since I was 13 years old, and it's not comfortable. And so to be able to say, let's talk about this as an economic conversation, not this he said, she said, not labeling something as bad.
Those days are over.
It's like, economically, how do we lift you out of this into a better economic situation that's better for you and your kids? And that, to me, that's the conversation.
I'll bet you, Robyn, I will bet you that when let's say you've interviewed an individual or their family for the first time, and you read the body language, you can see what's going on, and then they come on as a client of yours, you lend them the money, 3 years down the road, I bet you see a totally different outlook on things.
Well, and I've asked different farmers, and your family is a great example of this. I've asked farmers and ranchers, what's the greatest benefit you've seen in transitioning your farmland? And, in the beginning of asking that question, I thought they would say something on the balance sheet or, something in their profitability. Consistently, the answer that comes back is that their children came back to the farm. Yeah. You can't put a number on that.
Yeah, I know. That Carol and I, we're just so thrilled that we've got our youngest daughter's on board with us here, and then our oldest daughter, she is involved in her husband's family farm. Couldn't be better. They're 45 minutes away, and everything's good. Everything's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I love to be able to offer is if I can be a connection to people. I believe in facilitating as much as I can. I'm not going to have all the answers. Our team isn't going to have all the answers, but we can hopefully connect you with somebody that may have the answers. Yeah. And I just feel that generosity of that network, to be able to share it with that kind of like abundance of energy, that's just so important right now. You do it, that's what we do. And I think that generosity is really important right now.
Yeah. Well, Robyn, we're about out of time here. You've got another obligation. It's been an absolute honor to have you on. And believe me, we're going to do this again, because we just scratched the surface here this evening. Take us home here. Give us a couple minutes of what you see in the future. What needs to happen? Just take us home here.
I think the biggest thing that needs to happen is for each person that's listening, for each one of us, to realize you have the potential to make an enormous difference. Do not sell yourself short. Yeah. None of us can do this by ourselves. We all play a really important role here. And as you begin to collaborate with people like we have, Rick, I mean, it's actually really fun. The energy in this space is really positive incredibly hopeful and inspiring energy. We are participating in incredible change, not just for the health of our families, but the health of our country.
Yeah.
And to have that invitation in front of us as a generation, I think is one of the greatest gifts we could ever receive. And so to really see this as an open invitation to lend your talent and participate, none of us can do everything. So just park that idea. You don't have to, but lend your talent and join us. And I think, that to me is really the call to action.
That's awesome. Folks, replantcapital.com, and Robyn is on every social media handle. She is amazing. Robyn, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us tonight.
It's so much fun, Rick. It's so great to see you. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. Well, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you. We will see you next time. Thank you, Robyn. Bye-bye.
Thanks.